just to repeat that, it's Tuesday and it's July the 14th. So I forgot to mention it yesterday, but I don't know if you notice, I'm a little older than when I came to you last week. I had a birthday over the weekend, and like we say, it's great to keep having them, right? Having birthdays, the secret to long life. So, today it's a little cooler, and at least when I looked out earlier, it was cloudy. Now I noticed today it's not, right now it's not, as I'm looking out the window. If this was in the UK, this would be a landmark day. This would be a day that you referenced other days to. You'd say, hey, do you remember a month ago we had that day when it was sunny all day long? Well, we have one of those just about every day, right? The landmark days we have are, hey, do you remember when it really rained? Well, I was thinking about clouds. So this morning, Denise and I went out and we left the home really early, because if you want to walk in Phoenix and you don't want to be walking in the sun, then you better get out there early. And so we were out there around 5 o'clock and we were walking before sunrise. It's getting light, but the sun hadn't risen. And we like to do that because once the sun comes up, and for us it has to clear the mountains out of east of the valley, but once it comes up, then you're walking in the sun, and that can be pretty brutal. But some days when we walk, the sun should be there, but when we turn around to look, the sun is hidden behind a cloud. And so we get a little respite, a little break from the cloud, from the sun. And I have to tell you, I like clouds. Now, perhaps it was the fact that I grew up in London and clouds were the norm, and perhaps it's the fact that when our kids were growing up, they would play this game. We'd be driving along in the car and everybody would be looking out at the window of clouds, and somebody'd say, look, there's a seahorse. I look out there, I can't see any seahorse. There's sort of vaguely a one-armed bandit out there, but I can't really see. And then somebody else sees a pig or a donkey, and so I guess that was kind of fun. But I like clouds because they promise change. And you look at the clouds, and many times, particularly if you're flying above them, they look like they're massive. But today I read that according to the Bureau of Standards in Washington, D.C., a dense fog covering a 7-city block up to a depth of 100 feet, that whole thing is composed of less than 1 glass of water. That amount of water divided into 60 billion tiny droplets just causes all sorts of problems. You get a fog coming down into a city area, it can cause accidents, and you've seen all of the stories of massive car wrecks and things because people drive through the fog as though they've got x-ray vision until they hit the guy in front. But the reality is the fog really comprises next to nothing. It's a puddle, but it's a puddle that's made its way up into the sky. And the fact is that some Christians live with a cup full of problems, but they manage to blow them up so that they completely obscure the sun, they obscured vision, and the only thing that people see is the fog. And so for many, the fog is what they're driving in. Now, we often talk about, I hope you're living in the fog, but that fog is short for the favor of God. I hope you are living in the favor of God. I believe that His favor is something that we can depend on. But then there's the other sort of fog that causes confusion and lack of visibility and all sorts of things that happen. Fog can hinder us and really derail life. But it's interesting to me that God used a pillar of cloud, a pillar of nothing, really, but he used it as the means of his means to guide his children. So what was the significance of that pillar? Really, the pillar, if you were looking at it from the outside, or if you walked into it, it's probably nothing much. But for the children of Israel, that just assemblage of cloud or whatever it was signified the actual presence of God. To those outside, it may seem no more substantial than a puff of smoke. And it looked as though that maybe on a big gust of wind it would be torn apart. But for those who were under it, for those who knew its significance, it was tremendously reassuring. Why? Because when they saw that pillar of cloud, that represented the visible presence of an invisible God. And embedded within that were his promises, his covenant to them. They saw it, it was reassuring. That cloud represented the fellowship that they had with God, because God spoke to them out of the cloud. He made promises to them out of the cloud. That cloud represented the evidence of his provision, because from under that cloud fell the manna. When they were walking with that cloud, Moses struck the rock and water came from the rock. So all of the promises of God were embodied in that cloud. That cloud also represented protection, because when the children of Israel were marching across the desert, all of the surrounding peoples were looking at them, and they had something really unique, because in front of that crowd was the cloud. And I'm sure that struck fear in the hearts of those who were looking on. So that cloud represented God's protection. He went before them, and the enemies were put to flight. Why? Because of the cloud. And I think also that cloud represented shelter, because if you've ever been walking along in the desert, as I've just talking about, there's nothing nicer than to be walking in the shadow of a cloud. And so isn't that interesting that God used something so I don't want to say frail, but so insignificant. He didn't have a troop of archangels. He had a pillar of cloud. So, I want to ask the Lord to make me aware of his cloud. I tell you, it's so easy to follow the crowd, but I pray that he gives us the wisdom and the grace and the courage and the determination not to follow the crowd, but to see and follow the cloud. How would you like to live like that? How would you like to live that as you go through life, every time you go into an unknown situation, you go with the cloud before you? Thinking again of that sister who's going in tomorrow for medical tests, just know that when you go into that place, whether you see it or whether they see it doesn't matter. The fact is, his cloud goes before you, and we're embodied in that cloud is his presence, his protection, his provision, and that's our portion. So that was my thought about clouds today. I'm grateful for them. I want to be aware of them. I want to be aware not of them but of it, the cloud that represents his presence and his direction. And I want to be courageous enough to follow them, even where it's going somewhere that's different where I thought we were going. So I pray you'll join me in that prayer. And for you who are going into unknown situations and you wonder, where's the Lord? Well, he's there. And I pray that you see the cloud of his presence in front of you. Well, I'll talk to you again tomorrow. God bless. Love you all. Bye-bye.